Tony D and Little Joan with a screenwriter's rant on The Rings of Power. Yes, Lord of the Rings. I watched the first episode, so although I agree with Razor Fist, and these are some of the Rings of Power memes, Razor Fist basically says you should ignore this thing because the opposite of love is indifference, not hate, and he's right. But I really felt I had to watch the show because it would be illustrative of how not to write a screenplay. Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Check out my books. Links in the description. Comedy Horror in South Jersey. It's the Pineys. Books 1 through 9 available at Amazon.com. Don't forget, Kindle Unlimited is free. I will be in Thunder Road Books tomorrow at 11 a.m. till probably about 2, 3, depending. Then on Monday at LBI Book Swap, also at 11 a.m. So it's going to be a good Labor Day weekend. And I just added Morristown has an event called the Author's Picnic, and that's going to be November 5th. Check out the book tour link below. Okay, so as always, for a screenwriter's take, although this will be more of a rant than a take, I'll give you my non-spoiler review, and that's pretty short. The show is terrible. It's just awful. The only positive thing I could say about it is the visuals are nice, I guess, if you dig a bunch of set pieces, costuming, and cinematography. Beyond that, I can't see where they spent this money. Nori Brandyfoot is probably the most engaging character in the show. And I only watched the first episode. I cannot sit through a second episode of this horse hockey. Everybody else is universally terrible in this show. Now, it's hard to blame the actors always, but I have to blame the actors somewhat. Because even the actors have control of a bad take. If you're an actor and you're in something and you do a bad take and you know it, you really should say, no, I got to do that again. I mean, that's the little bit of control you have. Now, they may not use that take, but at least you have that much control. There are some bad takes in the show that just shouldn't have been in this. There's a moment where Nori Brandyfoot's sidekick takes a slip and goes into the mud face first, and it's just a bad fall. I mean, it's just a bad take. And let me tell you who's actually worse than Galadriel in terms of their acting. Lenny Henry. He is terrible in my view. There are scenes of him looking in this book, and he's just overdoing it. Like, if I'm looking at a book in a scene and I'm actually reading it, what I want to do is try to, like, look like I'm reading. So I want to read the actual words. He's got these scenes, there's not words on the page, there are all these symbols, and he's pushing his hands across it, but he's really overdoing it. And you can see the symbols. You can see what's on the page. Why is he doing this? Like, there's no big mystery. Like, these two hunters with giant antlers on their back are passing by the Harefoots who have hidden their village. And then he goes over to the book like, yes, the prophecy has been fulfilled. But you can clearly see on the page are two symbols that look exactly like the two hunters. You can see it clearly. So he's running his fingers over it, seemingly over and over again. It's like, what are you doing, man? And that's partly on the director, too. The director really, I don't know what they're doing. Did they just go, yeah, just make it look like you're, I don't know, looking at the book. Yeah, touch it with your fingers. Like, maybe Lenny Henry's a good actor. I don't know. Is that his name, Lenny Henry? I think so. But I thought he was terrible. Oh, my God. He's awful. I mean, I was just like, what is this guy doing here? He doesn't seem to be able to act. So I can see why he's one of the more vocal, like, oh, you better not You better not say anything bad about this show, because he seems very insecure about his acting. And with good reason, I'd say. Oh my God. I just thought, why would they cast this guy? He's got no gravitas to him whatsoever. He's supposed to be, I don't know, I guess the Harfoot elder, right? You'd want somebody who was really grizzled and old and kind of wise, like Yoda or someone like that. I mean, Yoda's not a person, but you know what I'm saying. Like somebody who moves slow with a lot of purpose. He's like, ooh, ooh. It's like he doesn't know what to do. It's like they gave him no direction. And that, I felt, was a lot of the actors. The only one who looks natural in this entire show is Nori Brandyfoot. Everyone else looks like they're lost. They don't know what to do or what direction to move. Nori knows exactly, right? She's got a mission. She's going to go get some blackberries. She's going to mess around. She's looking around. She's trying to figure things out. No one else in this entire cast is doing anything close to that, including Galadriel. So, let me start at the beginning. And I'm already into spoilers galore, but the show's just terrible. I wouldn't watch it. So, we're in the spoilers. It doesn't matter. Trust me, it does not matter. You do not want to waste your time watching this show. It's that bad. It's that bad. So at the beginning, Galadriel's narrating. Another bad move. And they spent $1 billion on this show. It's an outrage they spent that kind of money. I don't know if this is a tax write-off or what, because keep in mind how big Amazon is. It might be a tax write-off. But when you spend $1 billion on a show, where are the stars? Lenny Henry's the biggest guy you could get for this thing? I would have had every major star in Hollywood in this thing. Now, they may not have been able to get Cate Blanchett because of copyright reasons. They can't make Galadriel close to the Warner Brothers Galadriel. I could understand that. But let's say that was fine. I would have hired Cate Blanchett in a second to narrate the damn thing. She would have been great as a narrator. Thousands of years ago, when I was a young elf. Something like that. Instead, Galadriel narrates. And I'm already sick of hearing her like 10 seconds in. But there's no big stars here. You needed big stars. Like every major star in Hollywood should have been in this thing. Like every little role should have been taken up by a character actor. Oh, I know that guy. I know that guy. I know the guy. It should have been like, it's a mad world. Every major actor, player in Hollywood should have been in this thing. For $1 billion, that's what I would have done. Then you cast around that. And look, there's plenty of black people in Hollywood who are stars now. Throw them all into it. What are you doing? Who are these people? I know none of these people. Anyhow, so Galadriel starts out, and let me tell you something. The script is god-awful. It sounds like it was written in the conference room. It sounds like they got together. Well, Jeff wants our own version of Game of Thrones. Well, it is Lord of the Rings too. All right, well, we're going to combine the two and get both audiences. Oh, that sounds like a great idea, Tom. Sounds like a great idea. Sounds like we'll be making a lot of money. Oh, we will. But these corporate guys have no idea how to script something. It doesn't matter that you have all these IPs. Yes, a lot of people will watch the first episode. And then that's it. I mean, I cannot tell you how boring this thing is. All right. So it launches with the whimsical world of the elves. Before the time of man, before all the things that happen in Lord of the Rings, right? And it's like the old mythos of the Greeks or the Romans, that are basically the Greeks, or the Norse mythos, or any mythos you've ever read. It's like before the world, there was a tree, right? Before the sun, there were no sunrises. We had a tree, and that lit the world. Now, in terms of physics, that doesn't work. It's a metaphor, or it's this world that we can't really understand as humans. because we didn't live during that time, is the way it's supposed to play out. Instead, we get a scene in that world. Shouldn't have seen this world. Maybe a shot of it, to see how glorious it once was. But, so, one of the things she says, this was the time before sunrises, and we knew no death. Okay? So 2 major things she says in this monologue. No sunrises, there hasn't been a sunrise yet, and no death. Okay. So what happens? Well, she makes a paper boat. She's a little kid. Not a little kid, but like a young teenager. She makes a paper boat, and the other young elves are frolicking around near a stream in this idyllic world. Galadriel, though, is some sort of mutant who stays away from the group, folds up this paper boat, and puts it on the water, and the other elf kids throw rocks at it. Now, this seems to be completely contrary to the world of the elves. Elves aren't humans. They're different. They're mystical creatures that aren't grounded in reality. So when you have this scene that's very grounded in reality, human reality of like, well, little kids, they kind of pick on each other and do mean things to each other sometimes. It takes away the magical nature of elves. Like, elves aren't supposed to have the same sort of childhood that we have. Elves live for thousands of years. Their childhood could probably a couple of 100 years, right? So, you're talking about children who are 200 years old, and they're still throwing rocks and doing things that little kids do? Nah, that doesn't make any sense. Elves would be much more mature. They also take a ridiculous amount of time to do things because they live so long. Why are you in a rush to do anything? And Galadriel says in the monologue, we knew no death. So you essentially, okay, we're going to live forever. Are you in the rush to do anything? No. There's no rush for any reason. I'm going to make a ship, paper ship. I'm going to fly it. I'm going to put it on water. Oh, okay. 2 weeks later, I think I'm going to pick out the paper for my ship. What color do you think it should be? I mean, these people live for a very long time and know no death. Which is a bit of a contradiction of phrases right there. So anyhow, it's all an excuse for the terrible screenwriter to have a scene where her brother comes in, kind of saves her, and says something nice to her and teaches her about life. Again, that's a very human concept. The elves wouldn't have this, even this moment of, it's a little dark, right? For little kids, it's dark. The kid was being a jerk and sank her little paper boat. That's not something this idyllic world, it's essentially heaven is the metaphor. They live in a heavenly world that we can't possibly understand, where everything is good and light. They don't throw rocks at paper ships. They just don't do that. There's no reason to. Everything's great. They know such joy. We can't, as humans, even comprehend it. But not Galadriel. She's just a miserable bee. But her brother, her sainted brother, tells her something about, even the sun shines on the rocks in the water below. Which is a clunky metaphor. But then when you get to the end of the episode, you realize why he said it. It's just, okay, we're going to give out this clunky metaphor, so at the end, she could apply it again and do what she does at the end of the episode. That's the only reason it's there. Then we get into the war, right? So, the framing here, and I don't know the Tolkien history well at all, so go to Gary at Neurotic for that. He knows it all. But so they have this tree that provides them sunshine, and then there's this huge war with Morgoth, where they destroy the tree, and now there's a big war and the elves are fighting. Oh, and I forgot one other thing. The brother tells Galadriel the sun shines on rocks down below. There has not been a sunrise yet, right? This is before the tree is destroyed. They don't have sunrises. They don't have the sun. They have the tree. So to use the word the sun, wrong word to use. Wrong word. Now, it just so happens I wrote for a role-playing game where the world was constantly overcast. And every time I used a phrase like that, I had to go back, and my editor was like, "No, you can't reference the sun. They can't see the sun in this world." So I had to go back, and I would always change the words to light, in the shadows or whatever. So he can't use the word like that. There is no sun. There's no sunrise. No sun. It all comes from the tree. They also know no death. And he says, I won't always be here to protect you, Galadriel. To which she should say, why? We live forever. We know no death. Why wouldn't you be here? Are you going somewhere? You'll be back. So you see the problem with this sort of speech. They're trying to establish that they're close, but they're ignoring their own mythos. They're throwing in mythos from Tolkien. I assume they took some of this from Tolkien, trying to throw it in, but they're not reading it. They don't have any understanding of it. And even I can see it. A guy who's not particularly versed in Tolkien and the exact details of Morgoth and Valinor or whatever. So already they've screwed everything up in the first scene. Everything is screwed. And then they continue with this montage. So the war starts, and then we knew death, and we knew many words for death. Okay, which is interesting because Tolkien was a linguist, and I don't know if that's true. Maybe some of the Tolkien fans could tell me if that's a real line from the Index or whatever, or one of the Tolkien books, that they knew no death or knew no words for death. It's interesting that they take that tact. So there's this moment where now they have the adult actress playing Galadriel. There's this scene of devastation and a big giant pile of elf helmets. And she picks up one of the helmets and adds it to this giant pile. And that's it for that moment, for that set piece. That's a waste of money right there, right? They built this giant pile of helmets to do this scene so Galadriel could put the helmet on the pile. I can see where you wasted the money. We didn't even need to see that. It's all exposition, which doesn't resonate. Because we don't particularly like Galadriel. She's a very unappealing protagonist so far, and we barely know her brother who dies. So then it cuts to Galadriel leading a force of elves up in the mountains, right? So they're up in the mountains, and here, I'm going to just change the visual up a little. It's another one. This is, you have my bow, or you have my sword, and my bow, and my axe, and then it's Vin Diesel, and my family, right? See? So they're up north, and they've gone to the ends of the earth. And again, this is all kind of metaphor, and they're showing the maps, and they clearly show Valinor across a wide ocean to Middle Earth. And then it's they go to Middle Earth to do all this fighting. So they find this castle way out in the middle of nowhere. And as they're traveling there, one of the, they have this scene where the elves are climbing up a mountain. And elves are supposed to have superpowers. They're supposed to be stronger and faster and smarter than humans. We get none of that in this. They're just basically humans. What would have been great to see is something like from Peter Jackson, and you could argue like, well, they didn't want to repeat what Peter Jackson did. They kind of don't have a choice here. They're already showing in other scenes the elves are quicker and smarter than humans. So they had an opportunity here with their billions of dollars to do some CGI magic where they're climbing out the mountain, not like a bunch of humans going, and ice falling down, like elves would do it. Orlando Bloom doing it, like bam, 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 bam. And they're just going right up the mountain. And like stuff's falling down and they're just like dodging it. And then they get to the top. And it's like, whoa, that would have been a cool scene. They didn't do that. Another thing to establish the elves and their, amazing endurance or whatever would have been a scene of them saying something like, Galadriel, we have been marching for 28 days with no sleep, no food. Like, well, 28 days, that's a long time to go with no sleep and no food. But they're elves, see? That would be cool. I don't know if they could last that long. I mean, somebody would have to tell me. I'd have to look that up. But something cool like that. Now, so then they're marching towards the castle or whatever, and one of the elves stumbles in the cold wind, and somebody says, "Wait, Galadriel!" and helps the other elf, and Galadriel goes, "No, we must push on," which was totally for the trailer. But then she goes, then they have this and I understand that for the trailer, right? They wanted to have that moment. But usually that is a scene out of context. And what would normally happen in a regular drama would be that the lead character would say something, "We've got to keep moving on. Wait, Frank has stumbled. He's dying." And then the leader would go over to Frank, heft him up and go, "Are you okay? Leave me. I'm going to die." "No, no one will die. Not this day." And then she would drag him across the ice to the castle. But that doesn't happen. It's like they say, "Oh, Frank," and they don't call him Frank. "Frank has fallen." And she says, "Oh, we got to push on. Galadriel." And then finally she sort of relents and goes over to him and kind of checks him out. Like, and then she sees the signs of where the castle is. She sees like two towers, and then in the middle is this giant castle. Ah, we're here. But there's no lines to indicate that, like, oh, we finally got here or whatever. So they finally go in the castle, and I guess that guy's okay now. And it's supposed to be a big revelation that Sauron was there, and they find his symbol. But like, there's a moment where Galadriel just goes over to a wall and like punches through the ice. Again, superpowers, fine, but you haven't established them yet. But there's no reason for her to punch that space in the ice. Like, again, this is a visual medium. You got to show us something. Like, she sees this wall, and it's a wall of ice, and it's perfect. Wait a minute, there's a link of chain here, or a piece of wood, or sword, or a bony hand, or something. And then she looks at the ice and then punches it, realizes there's a doorway there. Something like that. Doesn't happen. So then they go into the next room. They find Sauron's, I don't know, lab or smithy outfit, whatever you call it. Meanwhile, the other elves are flitting around, and they stumble upon an ice troll. He comes out, trashes the other elves. Like, they don't even stand a chance against him. That doesn't make any sense. Again, you had an opportunity here to show the elves superpowers. Like, the troll throws a big boulder out of the darkness, hits all the elves, knocks them flat, and then comes out, starts trashing them. And then, of course, Galadriel comes in, kills the ice troll all by herself, essentially. That's that scene where she jumps off the sword, which is so stupid. You had an opportunity. Somebody got locked out. You That's a funny meme. You had an opportunity to show the superpowers of the elves and the superpowers of the ice troll. Like, the ice troll could be this insanely powerful opponent, right? So you could have this scene where all the elves surround this thing, and they're shooting the arrows at it, and the other troll's like, rah, and then, you know, one elf's dodging out of the way, and another elf dodges out of the way, and they're cutting it and cutting it. Nothing's working. This thing will not die. And then Galadriel comes in and just starts choo, 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 choo. Instead of this weird leap and then parkour, right? She just comes in there, starts stabbing the thing at a super fast rate. Or she stabs it in a place like, you know, like she cuts into the knees and like cripples it so it can't move around. She cuts off one of its hands and it's like, ah! You know, one of those scenes. I mean, you could have made it something. It looks like nothing. The fight scene looks like nothing. Who was the stunt coordinator on this? Me? I could have coordinated something better than this. Jumping off that sword was nothing. Galadriel just fights the thing by herself. They should have all been fighting it. And it, you know, you could do what the D&D troll thing, which is trolls, they can regenerate, right? So like she cuts off the hand and it's like, ah, and the hand just grows back instantly, and you're like, whoa, this thing's powerful. How are they gonna kill it, right? And then Galadriel has to like do some cool maneuver. There's this moment where they walk in at first, and guy's trying to warm up his hand. And he puts it all the way in the flame of the torch, and he's like, I feel no heat from my torch. And it's like, that's because it's so evil in here. no torch gives off heat. I don't know why they said that, but let's say they didn't. Then you would do what we did in D&D. You cut off a hand of a troll, and then Galadriel hits it with the torch so it can't grow back. That would have been a cool thing, right? You would have been like, oh, that's cool. That's how trolls work. Galadriel's the smart one. She's figuring this out. She's super strategic. So they're all fighting. And Galadriel, though, is the smart one. She knows, and this is a thing I could have told you if I scripted this, right? If I was forced to script this, oh, you have to have these events, that's exactly how I would have made that fight play out. I would have said, no, the trolls, they cut off a hand, it grows right back, like instantly. Or it like puts its hand against the ice and then pulls it back, and it's got its hand back because it's basically made of ice. But then when you burn it, it can't grow back, and it goes, Rah! And then that's how they kill it. But no, we just get this sort of generic fight scene, and then she's like, no, we have to push on, and the other elves put down their swords like, well, we're not going to go with you. In this symbolic gesture that, you know, I guess you could argue elves would be more symbolic like that and haughty, but in the context of the show, when you had this super grounded elf scene in the beginning, why are you making them like that? Why are you making them all haughty in one scene, but in the scene where life was perfect and they lived in idyllic Valinor before the war, things weren't perfect and they're throwing rocks at little paper boats? Anyhow, she's forced to go back to the Elf King. Okay? Now, at some point, they start showing some of the other characters, and I can't remember when, so... excuse me. One of the characters they show are the Harfoots, but I'll get back to them later. Let me go through all of Galadriel's character art. It's cut throughout the show, and she's the main character, so whatever. So she goes back to the Elf King, and you don't see her accepting her fate, kind of like, well, I have to go back because I can't go on by myself. You don't get that moment. You just get, it just cuts back to Elfland, Valinor, wherever they are, and they're like, okay, we gotta go back to the Elf King. The Elf King's like, no, the war's over. Everybody's going to Valinor. Everybody gets a reward, and like, she's hesitant to even accept the reward. Now she's perfectly fine telling Elrond, who is presented as one of the most effeminate, boring characters you could possibly imagine, it was already a tall order to outact Hugo Weaving. But give us someone, Elrond. He's one of the main characters. He's one of the reasons you optioned this damn thing. The actor playing Elrond should have been Hugo Weaving. Again, if you had $1 billion and it was okay with Warner Brothers, I would have hired him. Look at what Sony did with Spider-Man, right? Sony did Spider-Man and then cut a deal with Marvel. You could have done the same thing here. You spent $1 billion. You could have got Hugo Weaving, or a guy who looked just like him, right? You get Hugo Weaving, you CGI him up, you put him in there, make him look younger than he did, or you get a kid who kind of looks like Hugo Weaving. Maybe Hugo Weaving's a little old to play Elrond, but still, would have been great. Would have been great to see him again. And with $1 billion, you can't hire Hugo Weaving for 8 episodes? Give him $10 million. I'm sure you'd do it. $30 million. Who cares? You're spending $1 billion. It's the most expensive TV show ever made. And you don't have Hugo Weaving playing Elrond? Okay. Then get the next greatest actor you could possibly get. Get Tom Hardy to play Elrond. Get some big movie stars. Get Tom Cruise in this thing. The biggest movie stars in Hollywood should have been in this. Brad Pitt. Every English star that's ever lived, except you couldn't use the ones that were already in Lord of the Rings, right? You get everybody else. Problem solved. Anyhow. And no shade on the actor who played him. Maybe he's trying to do his best job. But man, it's just brutal to watch. So they're best friends. They're besties. Elrond and Galadriel. And then the scenes just go nowhere. But she has to accept an award from the king, the elf king, another character that's nothing. And he basically says, okay, as your reward, you get a little crown, and then you're going back to Valinor, which is basically heaven. They're going back to heaven. So it's like the end of the Lord of the Rings, right? Where Frodo also joins them on the ship, and they go to Valinor, and you never see them again, because they're going into all the light-filled heaven and light you could ever possibly know, and they're never coming back. So when you go to Valinor, you're kind of never going to come back, because why would you? But the elves left Valinor, so maybe she could come back. And you already showed Valinor, I guess. I don't know. So she doesn't want to go, obviously, but rather than talk about it, she gets on the ship, goes all the way to Valinor, and then there's a moment in which the other elves who were in her crew interact with her. Now, if you had had those scenes earlier where she saves the life of the other elf and says, don't worry, Frank, I'm not going to leave you behind, or had some other dialogue with them where we at least learned their names and maybe a little bit of their personalities, this might have resonated more. You know, I've been following you for the last 200 years, Galadriel. I would follow you into the depths of hell, but like something like that? No, none of that. So I don't care about any of these characters, including annoying Galadriel. Well, at the end of the episode, spoilers, more, there's a meteor that changes everything. And that distracts her, and she's able to, instead of going to heaven as all the other elves are, she's going to grab her brother's dagger that she's been carrying with her because the brother died in the war. She's out to avenge him, and she jumps off the ship. But they already established in showing all the maps, like Game of Thrones, that Valinor is thousands of miles away. So we're expected to believe that she jumps into the ocean and swims back to land, thousands of miles away. Which, maybe you could argue an elf could do that. But how long would it take? How long did it take them to get there? It feels like minutes. Because of the way it's shot, as From Heels versus Babyface points out quite correctly, the time, there's no sense of time in this thing. And that was super important to the mythos. It was super important to see the time periods. And we're talking about medieval societies. They took time for everything. This was a problem with Game of Thrones, right? The beginning seasons were like, oh my God, it takes these people forever to get anywhere. But that felt very real. And then suddenly towards the end, the TV people were like, well, this is boring. Let's speed this up. Oh, he hops on a dragon and he gets over here. Okay. Like, there are ways to show the passage of time. It's called a dissolve. It's called, and they had 1,000,000 keys. It's called 10 years later. Da, 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 da. They just don't do that. But we're expected to believe Galadriel jumps off the ship and then swims thousands of miles back to Middle Earth. Doesn't make any sense. It's flat out dumb and stupid. You know, if she had refused to get on the boat, and then in the distance we saw the shimmering lights that they were sailing to, and then she watches the boat, and they call to her from the boat, Galadriel, it's not too late, come with us. No, my friends, I cannot. And you could have had a scene where she jumps off the boat, like, near the shore with her dagger and goes right back. And you could have basically done the same thing, but it would have made sense. It would have held some weight. It holds no weight. It's boring. It's stupid. You just laugh at it because it's very similarly written to the first season of The Next Generation. You're expected to bow down and say, wow, because you're seeing the Enterprise. There's nothing behind it. There was nothing behind that Enterprise. So when they're having this big docking procedure in the first episode, in the Farpoint episode, I forget what it's called, something at Farpoint, like, it's so boring and it goes on forever. This was so boring and goes on forever. It's the same feeling you get. It's just empty. You don't even care about Galadriel. Like, there's nothing to it. Nothing. All right. So then we got the Harfoots, right? So the Harfoots are basically hobbits. They're not even supposed to be in this, from what I understand from watching Gary's at Neurotics videos. But, okay, let's say you're going to have the Harfoots because you need, again, corporate guys sitting around. All right, can we have hobbits in this thing? No. Warner Brothers has the rights to hobbits. Well, it says something here called Harfoots. Can we have those? Well, they don't have the rights to the Harfoots, but they're not supposed to be in the story. F that. Put them in the story. We need short, little, cute guys running around. It's got to be like Lord of the Rings, man. Oh, it's got to be like Game of Thrones, too. Well, we'll have them have sex with each other. So, that's what I imagine. So, the Harfoots are probably the strongest part of this horribleness. They hide their village out in literally the middle of the woods in the field. So it's 2 hunters walk by and they just hide the village. And so after they walk by, you see them unhide it. And they're cute and short and lovable little guys. So Nori Brandyfoot is the main character. And again, she's the most engaging actor by far, by a countrywide mile. Everybody else is just dead weight compared to her. She'll be the only actor, I think, that comes out of this. Although I hear the dwarves are good. They're not until the second episode, which I won't see. So she goes off with her little cousins. They're all a bunch of kids. And they sneak onto an abandoned farm that's out of their territory. And they've been warned not to go there to steal blackberries, which they pick and eat. And there's this moment where her sidekick takes a pratfall. It's just terrible. It's just awful. It's just a terrible pratfall. It looks fake. I would have never used that take. I would have said, no, you got to do it again. Just like really stumble and put your face in the mud. It looked awful. And then Nori's the only one looking around, only one paying attention. There's a warg in the vicinity, and then they run away before the warg can attack them because she senses it, and then she ushers them all away, and they get away before the warg can attack them, which seems almost like they shouldn't have gotten away because they're very little, but whatever. They go back to the village, and I'm not sure what's going on other than it's to establish that Nori has got a wandering lust and she wants to know what's in the rest of the world, and the other characters are like, Nori, get your head out of the clouds. We gotta make snails. And then there's a scene where I guess they're gonna cook snails to eat them, but like literally the actors are not doing anything. Like they're just sort of touching the props. Like if I were gonna write something in a scene, I would actually write something. I would say, hey, how you doing? Blah blah blah. I would actually write on the scene. The way these guys are acting are like, I'm writing. That's the way it is. So they're having this scene where I guess they're supposed to be cleaning snails because they're going to eat them. I guess. But what do you do when you clean snails? You would take a knife and you would take the shell and you would go, you'd scoop out the snail and you put it in a bucket and you'd throw away the shell, and you'd be doing that, kind of shucking them, I guess, or pulling out the snail with your hand, because I think they just come right out if you pull on them. And then you'd be putting them in a pot to eat them, to cook them up. Is that what they're doing? It doesn't make any sense. They seem, Nori Brandyfoot pulls one off a stump and like puts it with some of the others. The mother they don't seem to be doing it. You spend $1 billion on this show. Have them actually do it. Have them actually cook something. If they eat snails, have them cook snails. If you don't want to actually kill snails, well, okay. Have them cook fake snails. Have the prop guys make some snails up. Have some CGI ones that are moving, and then one they pick up and go whack, and throw the snail down. They're going to eat it. If that's what it is. Otherwise, why are they collecting the snails? I mean, that's bad. That's really bad. The only thing I can think of is they're so woke. They're like, well, we can't show them eating snails. We can't show them cooking the snails. It's another meme with Randy, Macho Man Savage. Oh, I miss him. Macho Mandoff, Randy Gandalf. So that's a bad scene. And that, again, that's not on Nori Brandyfoot. It's kind of on the other actor and the director. Why would you keep that in? If you're not, okay, let's say you don't want them to eat snails. You don't want to show them hurting any animal. That's fine. Show them with vegetables. Chop, 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 chop. Something. They're cooking something. If that's what it is, it looks like a nothing scene. It has nothing to it. The scene with the elves and the little paper ship had more ground reality in it than the Harfoots. And the Harfoots are supposed to be like English people. They are. And let me address the gender swapping. The gender swapping is stupid because the idea is a medieval society. And granted, it's fictional. But here's the thing. It's J.R.R. Tolkien who specifically made an English myth. And the Harfoots, or the Hobbits, are supposed to be, wait for it, English people. They're supposed to be the English. Everybody else is different races and whatnot. So there was absolutely no reason to gender swap anybody because Tolkien did mention other races in his book. And in fact, that was a perfect opportunity to introduce those races into this. Because this takes place hundreds of years, thousands of years before the events of Lord of the Rings. So you could have had those BIPOC characters running all over the place. You could have even had a line in it like, this was a time where, the world was new and all these people mingled together openly. There just wasn't, this is medieval times. It's supposed to be based on Earth. And in a simpler times, people stuck with their own. It was very tribal and village-like. So it wasn't just like race by race. It was about like, oh, you live over the hill. Oh, we don't talk to you people. That's how incredibly tribal it was. It's still tribal in some parts of the world. I had a friend who went to Mexico to go mountain climbing. He said the best thing you could do if you're traveling around Mexico is if you get to a village and you're, stopping for a drink or meal or whatever, and they ask you, oh, were you in the next village? The best thing you could do is say, oh, yeah, those people were terrible. Because they have very sort of regional, local pride in those little towns. So there's a rivalry. Not that they hate each other, but that they say, oh, yeah, we don't like Shelbyville. It's just like the whole Shelbyville Springfield thing in The Simpsons, right? So that's why gender swapping people totally F's this up. And they're just throwing in black people in random places. If you're going to do that, throw in some Asian people. Where are the Asian people? Why is there only one black elf? You got to if you're going to do it the whole way. And again, why aren't you using name actors? I just don't get it. $1 billion. So, the storyline with Brandyfoot, or whatever her name is, Nori, basically is just to establish that she's got her head in the clouds and wants to go wander. So at the end of the episode, when the meteor comes, it's like, everybody's seeing it because it's like a worldwide event, right? So it lands somewhere near the Harfoots while Nori's running around. And so she runs to the crater and finds, I thought it was going to be Sauron because I didn't really know much about this. But it turns out someone else in another video said, no, it's Hobo Gandalf is in the meteor, which does jibe with the book somewhat because Gandalf and characters like him were supposed to be like angels. They were more celestial, so they did come from probably the clouds or the sky or whatever. So that does kind of jibe, but it feels a little out of place. But it's a way to end the show. I'll give them that. So she finds crazy ass Gandalf, and now she's going to be his friend, and there's your Frodo and Gandalf. Except it's going to be new Gandalf trying to figure things out, and Nori Brandyfoot helping him, I guess, and they go off on a wee adventure. Then you got Don Lemon Elf and his love story with the human. So they get word from, this is about midway in the episode, they get word from the Elf King, the war is over, and the elf has been going into this, Don Lemon, has been going into this village just so he could see this girl who he's in love with. And the costuming on that particular actress, for some reason, is skimpier than any other medieval woman I've ever seen ever. So she's got two, little strings and then, cleavage going on. And she's basically a bar wench, but she's a hot bar wench. But, her top doesn't seem to fit medieval times. And she's a human, and he's an elf, and that is forbidden. So, for some reason, they've had this thing going. But then later it's revealed that Don Lemon has been guarding that area for 79 years. But it feels like he just met this girl a couple of weeks ago, and he's trying to screw up the courage to ask her out. And obviously it's a big thing against the humans. Don't like the elves all that much for some reason, even though they're there to protect them. And they're bristling under his rule, which all he does is show up in a bar. And they try to make him out to be kind of a superhero because he walks past this chess game and then tells the guy what the move is to win, and he barely looks at it, and he's wearing a hood. And then there's a big reveal where he takes off the hood in the bar, and it's like, okay, I guess he had to hide himself because he's an elf. But then when he leaves, he doesn't put the hood back on. So why did he have the hood? Why did we wait? Again, it's terrible script writing. It's like, oh, keep on the hood and we'll reveal it in the bar, and that'll be cool. Maybe for a visual, but it doesn't make any sense logically as a screenwriter. Why does he keep the hood on? It's not raining. He's been there for 79 years, going back and forth to this village. 79 years. That scene should have played out completely different. He should have knew everybody in that village because he's known them since he's known their grandchildren or their grandparents. He knows their ancestors. 79 years he's been there. It should have been like, oh, it's him. Hey, Don Lemon. Great to see you. Or they hate him, I guess, but they should have all known his name, and they should have known exactly where he was going to walk, what he was going to do, what he was going to order in the pub. He should have known everything. And if he's in love with this girl, like, what's the timeline here? When did he meet her? He's been there for 79 years. Makes no sense. Anyhow, he's in love. Although, as from Heels versus Baby says, Face, he contends that they're just in lust and need to F. So he gets word that the war's over. They're all going home. And he's, of course, disappointed. He's in love with this girl. So I guess he ignores orders and then goes to visit the girl again. And she's a healer. And at that moment, Farmer brings his cow to be healed because the cow is squirting black milk, gross milk. And the elf squirts some out and says, where did this cow feed? And like, oh, to the east or something like that. And that's some sort of signal to him. Okay, so he's going to go explore it. And then Healer Girl says, well, I'll come with you. She has virtually no skills. A moment ago, they're hiding the looks at each other. They can't hook up, but she could go with them. that is medieval society. That's basically the same thing. You go off with a strange man in medieval society, well, he can pretty much do whatever he wants to you. It's not like the cops are going to do anything about it. There are no cops. There's no fingerprints, nothing. He gets you 2 steps in the woods and wants to do something to you. Yeah, you're not going to have any kind of recourse, let's say. So, anyhow, he's not like that, fortunately for her. So they go and they find the town next over is on fire. I don't know how that makes the cow squirt black milk. Gross. But then the meteor comes, and that's basically all we get of them. We don't get any of the dwarves, and that's about it. So, in their defense, it's a tough thing to script. You've got all these characters, and you haven't even introduced the dwarf yet. But they wasted a ton of time. They wasted way too much time. They could have done a voiceover in the beginning. They could have just focused on Galadriel and maybe the Harfoots if you needed to do that. Way too much time with the Harfoots. Lenny Henry was terrible with the book. Doesn't seem to know. I don't know. I don't know what he's angling for. In terms of like he knows something, he sees something in the heavens, but they don't exactly explain it. I assume he sees the portents and he's going to be the wise old man, but he doesn't sound wise at all. And he yells at Nori Brandyfoot, who's the only appealing character in this entire thing. Galadriel is incredibly unappealing. She's bossy. She's unlikable. She doesn't do one nice thing for anybody in this entire opening episode. Neither does anybody except Nori Brandyfoot. Brandyfoot is likable because she helps her. Her cousin falls in the mud. She helps her. She's saying, well, oh, we shouldn't go there, Nori. And Nori's like, oh, well, we wouldn't have any fun if I wasn't here to push you. That's kind of a fun character thing. And when she sees the wolf, she gets everybody out of there. Nori Brandyfoot, only character in this entire thing doing something nice. Her mother is sort of henpecking her about doing anything. Her father seems okay, but kind of clueless. Lenny Henry is just, again, totally pointless, acting horribly. He's got no business throwing his weight around. His acting, in my view, is just terrible. Part of that is on the director. Why would you keep these takes? Why? Why wouldn't you reshoot this? You spent $1 billion on this thing, and that's the best take you got out of this? Where's the money being spent? Where's the money being spent? I guess shrinking down everybody who's a Harfoot? I guess. We have hearts as big as our feet. Somebody pointed out, well, you're a Harfoot. You know, your hearts are normal and feet are normal size for you. This is the problem with terrible screenwriters writing fantasy that they don't really understand. If you're not going to use, and to some extent, I almost get it. They're afraid to use too much of J.R.R. Tolkien. They're trying to get away from that. Well, in which case, you got to make up your own rules and your own lines. You know, and you got to describe things with metaphors. You want to describe things in dialogue that are important to the story. So if you've got important locations and castles and dragons coming up, you want to, you know, we Harfoots, our hearts are as big as a dragon. Something like that. Or we have hearts bigger than a dragon's heart. Something that'll refer to something up that's coming. It lays the groundwork for what's coming, which I don't care because I'll never watch this show again. It's brutally boring. I mean, it was tough to get through this first episode. They had a shot of Galadriel and Elrond talking, and it was so distracting. It was an over-the-head shot, and you could see right behind them is this big cliff and water and rocks. And it looks beautiful, but it was so beautiful I got distracted looking at it, and I just tuned out on the dialogue, which was fine because I don't think I missed anything. They were just arguing over like whether or not Galadriel should give up her sword or whatever. What are you doing? You know, another way to approach this would have been not to try to do this epic Lord of the Rings thing right away. Would have been to focus on one character. Like, so let's say it's Galadriel. Okay. Because you're trying, I think you should have, if you were going to focus on anyone, it would have been Elrond, but all right, you're doing a woke thing, whatever. You focus on Galadriel and you start the thing right in the middle of it. And then in flashback, you can use the backstory of, well, why are you here? Well, I'm here to avenge my brother. And you know, you could have that centered on the dagger that she took from him. Maybe she wasn't supposed to take it, and there could be a scene where she kills some ice troll, and a character saying, "Oh, thank you, you saved me from that ice troll," and she's lost the dagger and she's freaking out because the dagger's, and then later you realize why the dagger's important to her, because it was her brother's. And she uses that dagger, and she's vowed to put that dagger through Sauron's heart. And you could have set up a thing, you know, prequels are, again, I wouldn't do it, but you could have set up a thing where, like, Sauron is essentially undead by the time we get to him in Lord of the Rings, right? He's, you know, he was killed in a particular battle. And when he was killed in that battle, he was basically undead, right? So you could set up Sauron as a guy who's alive, right? But he's full of evil magic, and the climax could be that Galadriel kills him. He's no longer alive, but you know, he had evil magic to survive that or become undead or keep, you know, like Voldemort did. That could be the big wind up. You wind up to that, and then she kills Sauron. You didn't have to they're trying to do this epic thing, but the thing with Lord of the Rings is they had the books. They had the structure of those epic journeys. They're just shooting off a bunch of nonsense here. They're trying to set it up, hoping it'll all come together. It's not the way you do it for an epic journey. You got to set up the entire world and have an ending, an epic ending. You don't have an epic ending here. If you pursue this, it's just going to be soap opera nonsense. Even Game of Thrones, even though it was unfinished, it seemed to be driving to something. It was driving to Daenerys and her war in Westeros, even though George R.R. Martin hadn't written that part yet. It was driving to the big war. Lord of the Rings was driving to that scene in Mordor where they destroy the ring. And it's this epic long journey. What is this show driving at? Nothing. You could, again, make it drive to she kills, quote unquote, Sauron for this age. But he's got some evil magic that she didn't know about. That kind of undermines the ending, but you could make it work. Maybe he would have been more powerful if Galadriel hadn't stopped him. Something. But they pitched the show as this is the Rings of Power. This is the Lord of the Rings. This is how the rings got started. Well, that's not going to end well. We already know that. The human kings get the rings and they become ring wraiths. And Sauron controls them and evil times abound. So what is Galadriel going to do here? She ultimately fails in her quest. Here it is, the Silmarillion. This entire first episode doesn't do anything to draw you in. It's just boring. It's showing you maps. It has all the trappings of it. Again, I think this was written in a corporate boardroom. Oh, we're going to need maps like in Lord of the Ring, or like in Game of Thrones. Oh, yeah, we got to do the maps. Yeah, let's do the maps. And we're going to have the elves. Oh, got to have lots of elves. Let's have Elrond. We own Elrond. We own Galadriel. What else can we throw in there? Well, anything in the index. Oh, I got a bunch of other elf names. Yeah, throw them all in too. Even the characters that haven't met each other, who cares? These geeks still love it. They'll love it. They're already compressing, my understanding, hundreds and hundreds of years of history into, events that they didn't have to do that. They could have picked one character, like Galadriel. Just pick her and her adventures. Make all new characters. Galadriel goes to how about Galadriel going to the lands, the unexplored lands from Tolkien's works, right? So the equivalent of those Middle Eastern dudes who had the elephants, the crazy elephants at the end of Lord of the Rings, remember that? Those guys were from the southern lands, I think they called it. She goes there. You can still have her. She's an elf. You can still have magic. You can have all these BIPOC characters. You can get everything you want. And it wouldn't be Tolkien lore, but what are the fans going to argue with? Well, that's not in the index. Yeah, it's all new. It's Adventures of Galadriel. Would have been something. I mean, you could make it work. If you're trying to recreate Lord of the Rings and you're doing a prequel, you're screwed. You can't do a sequel. That doesn't make any sense. Because it's essentially over. So, what are you doing here? You want to do your own fantasy thing? Do you know how many freaking books of fantasy there are that they could have done, that they could have licensed? Brand new books. Excellent books. That all they would have had to have done with their $1 billion is buy those books and recreate them exactly. Find the next big hit book that isn't Tolkien or Game of Thrones. Let me think. Think for a moment. I don't read a tremendous amount of fantasy, so I'm trying to think of the next best one. But I'm sure all of you out there are hastily writing in my comments all the great fantasy books you can put in there. But I'm sure you can think of one. Oh God, I can't think of one off the top of my head. The only one that comes to mind isn't really. It's my kind of fantasy. I used to read alternate Earth stuff, and there's this one great book about an alternate Roman Empire that makes it to America, and it's a great book, but it's more of a comedy, and it's kind of medieval, but it doesn't have the magic in it. I mean, there's so many of them out there. And you could argue, well, they're not Lord of the Rings. Yeah, they're not. Neither is this. All it is the trademark. And if you're going to go that far afield, that's a funny Galadriel. If you're going to go that far afield, you might as well have done The Adventures of Galadriel in Middle Eastern lands. If you couldn't do the hobbits, why put them in? Why put the Harfoots in? You're trying to recreate Lord of the Rings and make it woke. It just doesn't work. Everybody's laughing at the Gandalf character. The only thing they kind of like are the dwarves, because that's the one thing you didn't really see in Lord of the Rings, right? The dwarves were all dead by then. You saw them in The Hobbit, but you didn't really see them in Lord of the Rings. They weren't done all that well in The Hobbit, from what I understand. So that's kind of why they're liking the dwarves. Maybe you could have focused on the dwarves, done a whole dwarven thing. People would have liked that. Fans of this genre, anyway, if you delved into dwarven life. And then maybe you could have introduced BIPOC characters, because you could have argued, well, some of them are darker because, you know, they live in the mountains or whatever. I don't know. Again, it's not a thing. It's just not a thing. I don't know why you had to gender swap anybody. You could have just launched an entire books or an entire series about the southern lands, or wherever the, you know, characters who had those elephants came from. Just not even do any of the characters from Lord of the Rings. And you could say we're extending the Tolkien mythos. And again, people like Nerdrotic Gary it would have been tougher for him to argue. Now he would have said, well, this isn't Tolkien. But they're saying that anyway. You were going to get that anyway. The moment you fired, what's his face, the Tolkien scholars, yeah, these guys weren't on board with this. We all know it. The people who care about this kind of stuff, they know. So why even bother to appeal to them at all? Because if you're not going to get the Tolkien people like Gary from Neurotic and people who even know who the hell a Tolkien scholar is, then you might as well forget it. You might as well not even try to do it. Just use his name. Say, oh, this is based on Lord of the Rings, and just do whatever the hell you want. Don't try to rewrite, oh, we're going to do it even better because we have characters of color in this. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. I hear the dwarf princess is actually pretty good, though. And again, she better be. She was talking a big game, too. Lenny Henry should just shut up. I thought he was terrible in this. And I would not watch a second episode. Come on. Why am I going to watch a second episode? Low opacity Elrond returns. Yeah, I mean, there's just no reason to watch this for me, other than to show you that everything in this is scripted very, very poorly. The only saving grace is it is a lot to script, but too many characters, too many things going on. So if you're going to do a world building thing, you better understand that down the road, it's got to come together somehow in a big way, like it did in Lord of the Rings. And that's an epic thing to do, right? It's hard to map that out. It takes years of development. But they spent $1 billion. I would have been happy to spend 6 months or to a year writing these scripts and making them awesome. And they could have followed Tolkien's work. Why not? I'm sure if you dig deep enough, you could find a female character in there that could be your main character. I mean, Galadriel could have been your character. She could be this diplomatic character as she is portrayed. Someone who has a lot of pull in Middle-earth, but doesn't actually go fighting everything. And if you want a girl that fights all the time, well, I'm sure you could have found one of them too. I think we're running out of memes here. Guardian Is that 1 star? Yeah, and a lot of people are really trashing this thing in the mainstream media, which tells you a lot. I think they don't like Jeff Bezos more than, I think they don't like the show too. It's just, I think, epically bad. Epically bad. People are giving it a 4. I think that's generous. At most, I'd give it a 2, only for Nori Brandyfoot. It's mostly unwatchable, in my view. Does it follow a 3-act structure? It's kind of hard to, because it's like Galadriel's. The first act is the introduction of the world and Galadriel, and then the second act is like, oh, here's Nori Brandyfoot and Don Lemon, and then they kind of just let Galadriel simmer in the background with her boat trip, and then the third act is Galadriel jumps off the ship, Don Lemon and his girlfriend go explore the burned out village where obviously more orcs are coming, and the Harfoots are gonna be in trouble soon, and then the meteor. And the meteor that changed everything. I have no interest, though. I don't have any interest in these characters whatsoever. They're just too boring. They other than Nori, they have no charisma, and I really hate Galadriel. I mean, one of the things you could have done is just done Nori Brandyfoot adventures. That would have been okay. And then you could slowly introduce some of the other characters, and then the big reveal could be like, oh, she runs into Galadriel. She runs into Elrond. That could have been big. But the Harfoots aren't even supposed to be in this age, so I don't know what we're doing here, Amazon. I honestly don't know what you're doing. You spent $1 billion on this thing. Doesn't look like you spent $1 billion. This is CW with slightly better effects. The effects are not where you want to spend your money. You want to spend your money first on the script. The script should have been on point. Whoever wrote this thing shouldn't write. They're terrible. They're absolutely terrible, in my view. Same thing with the directors. They're mostly to blame for this, 99%. You can't write an epic with a bunch of corporate guys saying, oh yeah, put some elves in there. Make sure you got Elrond and Galadriel. Yeah. We got those IPs. Throw them in there. No, you need guys who really know what they're doing. You need top-notch fantasy writers for this. You just don't have them. And you just don't seem to care. And you'll make your money on this first episode, I guess, but you ain't making your $1 billion back. No way. No way. No one's going to buy these toys, in my view. And this is unsalvageable. It's unsalvageable. If it's this boring from the first episode, I don't see how you salvage this thing. There's nothing here. $1 billion? You know how many movies I could have made with that $1 billion? I could have given you something so insanely epic, they'd be talking about it for the next 50 years. My comic, The Travelers, and I've written fantasy, it slowly unrolled over several years, and I've got a pretty good world established because I built upon what I established in the beginning, explained everything, and this just doesn't have that. It had it with Lord of the Rings because, Tolkien was a great writer with lots and lots of detail. The devil's in the details. The details here are, every detail is like wrong or off or missing. It's like scene missing. We're giving you fantasy. See? Swords, wizards, elves, hobbits, trolls, castles, Sauron. Yeah, you got all the elements, but they don't come together. You could do the same thing with James Bond. Oh, he went to the casino. He's had a martini. There's a beautiful woman. There's a bunch of gadgets. There's a bunch of bad guys. They're trying to kill him. But if it doesn't come together, you get Quantum of Solace and the Hotel Hindenburg. So they should just stop this. They never should have released it. $1 billion. What would be another 50 million in reshoots to fix it? Nothing at this point. You should have audience tested this with a real audience and said, "Oh, we do not have something good here." And then you should have went back and reshot everything to fix it for about 50 mil. I mean, which is a drop in the bucket when you spent $1 billion. I don't know what you spent your money on. I really don't. But I assume Amazon can absorb this because they're so massive. They're $1 trillion company. Right? So, okay. On to the next thing. On to the Terminal List and Jack Reacher, I hope. All right. I'm going to wrap this here because I really got to pee. That's it for me, Tony D and Little Joan. Check us out on Odysee, Bitchute, and Rumble for our more bass takes. If you can imagine a more bass take than that. And I'll see you in the next one.